The following is a summary of the Sicha of Shabbos Parshas Mishpatim, which is also Shabbos Shekalim, Mevorchim HaChodesh and Erev Rosh Chodesh Adar Tov Shin Nun. On this Shabbos, in other words Shabbos which was in Tov Shin Nun, which was Shabbos Parshas Mishpatim, Shekalim and Erev Rosh Chodesh, there are many inyonim kloliim, general items in Avodas Hashem which come together. First of all, it's Parshas Mishpatim, which is a continuation of Matan Torah. Second of all, it's Parshas Shekalim, when we read of the donation of the half shekel, which was given to create the Adonim, the sockets in the Mishkan, and every single year it was donated for the Korbanos Tzibur, the communal offerings in the Beis HaMikdash. As it says, on the 1st of Adar, they made an announcement about the Shekalim to prepare for their collection on the 1st of Nisan. And consequently, the giving of the half shekel was connected with the Adnei HaMishkan and the Korbanos Tzibur, the general communal offerings in the Beis HaMikdash, which were a very key element in our Avodas Hashem. And also it's Erev Rosh Chodesh Adar, which we have the festival of Purim, in which the Gemara says, Kimu Masha Kiblu Kvar, that on the festival of Purim, the Jews reaccepted what they had already accepted by Matan Torah. So we want to connect these matters, and especially the connection between the Sedra of Mishpatim and the Parsha of Shekalim, because seemingly they actually represent two different types of Avodas Hashem, and in fact different from one extreme to the other, as we shall explain. The Avodah of a person is Ani Nivresi L'Shamesh Eskoini. I am created in order to serve my Creator. And that is divided into two types of Avodah. The first is Choil, the Avodah which is mundane, the weekdays, when we engage in the Lamates Malachas, the 39 Malachas, which we are permitted to do during the weekday. The second is Shabbos, which is the Avodah of Kedusha, Kodesh. And on that day, mitzvah la'angoi, it is a mitzvah to delight in Shabbos and not to do any malacha. In fact, if we have a look at the Lamates Malachas of Shabbos, the 39 work activities of Shabbos, we learn that from the construction of the Mishkan, because any malacha which was involved in the construction of the Mishkan is prohibited on Shabbos. And so the work activity during the weekday of the creation of the Mishkan was in fact a choil activity. And as it says, V'asu li mikdash, you should make from me a mikdash from the 13 or 15 material items which were used in order to make the Mishkan. And although gold and silver, etc. was given, only part of it was used for the actual construction, and the rest remained of their wealth in their possession. Similarly, by the Lamates Malachas are themselves mundane. However, the Avodah of a person is to make sure that they should not be in contradiction to Kedusha, and furthermore, that they're made chulin al taras HaKodesh, that they are mundane matters, however, which are used for Kodesh. However, ultimately, those work items themselves remain choil, remain permissible, and only part of them become a chefza de kedusha, a holy item. As it says in the pasuk, sur mera va'asei toiv. Sur mera means turn away, that the dvorim gashmiim, the material, should not be a contradiction to Kedusha, and asei toiv, and make from the items which you are engaged with something of Kedusha. So during the weekday, the avodah is with the 39 malachas, which are mundane, and only part of them are elevated into a chefza d'kedusha. In contrast, on Shabbos, Shabbos is kodesh l'Hashem. Shabbos is completely an idea of kedusha. So the difference between these two types of avodah, kodesh and choil, manifests itself in the difference between Mishpatim and Shekalim. Mishpatim, which are the dinim of civil law, bein Adam lachaveroi, in the main are choil, are mundane, and deal with mundane matters. And in fact, they are surmera, turning away from evil in a way which human intellect necessitates them. And in fact, we need to emphasize at the beginning of the parsha that also these, ve'elam hashpatim, in addition to the ones which were said previously in Yisrael, these are also were given at Sinai. Although, since intellect, human intellect necessitates them, it is logical to say that in fact many of them were kept even prior to Sinai. In contrast, Shekalim, although a shekel is a physical coin, nevertheless, from that coin there was complete transformation into the sockets of the Mishkan and the Karbanas Sibud, the communal offerings. It was given all at once, and all of it was made into a holy item. So much so that Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the level of Chachma Kedusha, wondered how is it possible that this physical item of a coin could be completely transformed into Kedusha, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to show him a matbea shalesh, a fiery coin, in order to demonstrate to him how it is done. And therefore it comes out that Mishpatim is the idea of choil and Shekalim is the idea of kodesh, two different types of avodah. Now, one might suggest that they are in fact two stages in avodah, because the order of avodah is you go min hakal el hakoved, from the easier to the more difficult. So you might think that the beginning of avodah is sur mera, the idea of mishpatim, the engagement in choil, and thereafter you have the asay tov, which is that the choil becomes kedusha. However, you can't say that one avodah finishes and another avodah starts, because we find even by tzadikim gemurim that both the avodas are integrated into their general avodah. And in fact, both are needed. One needs the avodah of choil, one needs also the avodah of kodesh. And therefore, we must say that there is an advantage in one, and there's an advantage in the other, and both are key in our avodas Hashem. How do we explain that in terms of purpose? So, in terms of reasons for creation, there are two explanations. The first is an explanation in which reasons for the creation were given. Reasons which sit in our intellect. So, for example, in the Sefer Eitz Chaim, it's written that the reason for creation was legalois shleimos kochosav, in order to reveal the ultimate array of God's powers and capabilities. And other reasons are given in Sfarim for creation, all of which are tamei sichlim, are reasons which sit in the intellect. There's another reason which is given, which is nisava HaKadosh Baruch Hu liyas lo yisbara dira b'tachtonim. Hashem desired to have a dira, and as the Alter Rebbe said, if a taiva is nishtoken kasha, you can't ask questions on a taiva. In other words, this reason, if you want, for creation completely transcends the intellect. What is the difference between reasons for creation which sit logically and those which transcend the intellect? Well, the difference is quite clear in their relationship to the creation itself. according to the reasons that sit in the intellect, there is in fact place for the creation. In fact, the reason for the creation is quite simply because there is utility within the Metzius, the actual fabric and being of the world, and that fulfills, if you want, the purpose. So, according to the reason of the Eitz Chaim, that it is legala shleimus kechosav, in order to reveal the full array of God's capabilities, when the world is created, that fulfills, the world itself is a Metzius, which fulfills that reason. However, according to the reason of nisava, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu desired the world, which was a reason which completely transcends intellect, then there is no Metzius for the world. The only Metzius, the being of the world, is only because Hashem wanted it, and in fact the feeling by the person and by their avodah is that the world is not a Metzius. So just to go over that again, according to the reasons that sit in intellect and are logical, the main avodah of the world is with the Metzius of the world, and bringing out that the world is not a contradiction to godliness. However, it is part of creation, it's the reason of creation, it remains choil, it remains mundane, it remains something separate, and yet it's not a contradiction to godliness, and it can be used for kedusha. And the avodah within that is within the parameters of the human being, rather like the Mishpatim. In other words, these are logical laws which apply to a creation which was made to be something which is mundane, choil, and yet we can transform it into kedusha. In contrast, the avodah, because of the reason that transcends intellect, where there is no Metzius of the world, then the shleimus ha'avodah, from the position of Nisava HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem created the world because of a desire which transcends intellect, then the shleimus ha'avodah, the complete avodah of a person, is when they serve Hashem with complete bittul, and there's complete transformation to Kedusha, and it's completely above human parameters, which is manifest in the idea of Shekalim. Because in a shekel, you take the shekel, the whole shekel, in one go, and transform it completely into something which is Kedusha. So, if we wanted to summarize that, we could say that the Tamei Habriya, the reasons given for creation which are within logic, sit with the idea of the avodah in inyonei choil, in the mundane, and the reason for the creation because of nisava, because of a taiva, because of something which transcends intellect, sits with the idea of kodesh, sits with the idea of kedusha, which there is in fact a distinct advantage in each one. The maila, the advantage of the approach of nisava, the reason which transcends intellect, is because then there is a fusion with the level of godliness which is higher than the world. Whereas the advantage of Mishpatim is that there is a fusion of the world with godliness within the parameters of the world and within the Metzius, within the being of the Tachton. Now, the true shleimus, the true perfection, is actually when you have a fusion of both of those levels. In other words, you have a creation which starts with nisava, with a reason which transcends creation. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted, it was his desire, that this should in fact be rolled out within the realms of logic. In other words, you have a fusion of the level of godliness which transcends creation, which permeates and comes within the parameters of the human mind. How do we have the fusion of those two? That is through something which transcends both of them. And that is B'koach Atzmos, the power and capability of the essence of godliness. In other words, that creates a dira in which Atzmusoi or Mahusoi, his very essence and being, is revealed, but where? B'tachtoinim, within the parameters of the creation. So now we will actually understand the fusion between Mishpatim and Shekalim, because Mishpatim represent civil law, Chayil, Shekalim represents the complete transformation into Kedusha, and this Shabbos is a fusion between both of them. In fact, this idea is actually articulated in both Mishpatim and in Shekalim. In other words, the fusion of the two is alluded in both of them. In Mishpatim, which is civil law, which is the idea of Chayil, you have the emphasis right at the very beginning, Ve'ela HaMishpatim, Maha Rishonim b'Sinai, just like the first ones from Sinai, these are also from Sinai. In other words, even though these Mishpatim are logical and intellect necessitates them, nevertheless, they still need to be permeated with the bittul of Sinai. By Shekalim, you have the opposite. You have a matbeya shalesh, and this fiery coin, which is completely transformed into Kedusha, nevertheless, what does it do? What effect does it have? L'chaper al nafshei sechem. It can give a kapara for the most stringent of sins, the chet ha'egel, which is the birur, the refinement of the lowest level. That is what the Shekalim can achieve. Now, when did these two Mishpatim and Shekalim come together? They come together on Erev Rosh Chodesh Adar, because Rosh Chodesh itself is an intermediary between Shabbos and Chol. It's explained in Sifrei Kabbalah that the days of the week are days in which the Sphira of Malchus receives from Zah, from Zeir Anpin. On Shabbos, you have the Aliyah of Malchus to its source. On Rosh Chodesh, which is a memutza, an intermediary, then Malchus receives from Chachma, but not through Zeir Anpin. In the words of Chassidus, this means that in the weekday, you have a revelation of godliness which clothes itself within the world. On Shabbos, you have a revelation of the Shem Havaya, Kodesh LaHashem, which transcends the world. And that's why Melacha is forbidden on Shabbos. On Rosh Chodesh, you have a fusion of the two. On the one hand, you have godliness which transcends the world, however, which comes also and permeates within the world. And there's another inyan of Rosh Chodesh. In the davening of Rosh Chodesh, we mention 12 expressions of bracha, of blessing. And that's why Rosh Chodesh, each Rosh Chodesh is connected with every other Rosh Chodesh, especially Rosh Chodesh Sivan, which was the day on which Hashem was prepared to give the Yidden the Torah. And this is emphasized in the minhag of Noshim, of women, who have a minhag not to do melacha on Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because they didn't want to give their rings to the Egel. What's the connection with the Rosh Chodesh? The answer is because it's connected with the Rosh Chodesh Sivan, with the idea of Torah. And the chidush of Torah, the novelty of Torah, is the bitul hagazera, the annulment of the decree, that elyonim lo yedud lamata, v'tachtonim lo yaylo lamayla, that the upper shouldn't descend below and the lower should not ascend above, and the bitul, the annulment of that decree, took place by Matan Torah. And that is emphasized on Rosh Chodesh, which on the one hand, you have a revelation of godliness which is higher than the world, and at the same time, it's mutar b'asiyas malacha. It is permitted to do malacha on Rosh Chodesh. In fact, it's interesting that the reason why the women have a minhag not to do malacha on Rosh Chodesh is because by Matan Torah, Hashem spoke to them first. In other words, Hashem's the fact that Hashem spoke to the women first before the men emphasizes that that there is a level of kedusha in the women, and hence they do not do malacha on Rosh Chodesh. This is all emphasized in the concept of Adar, Purim, which on Purim, of course, as we mentioned beforehand, is and brings out the strength of Matan Torah, because Kimu, Masha, Kiblu, Kvar. The difference being that on Purim, they accepted the Bitul to Hashem willingly. Purim is permitted to do Malacha, but the Simcha of Purim transcends the Simcha of the entire year. Adola Yada, and in fact, as it says, all the Moedim will be B'Teilim Chutz Purim, which is a Gilui Melamayla. This is a tremendous revelation from above, however, which permeates the world. And that is achieved b'koyach ha'atzmus, with the power of the essence of Hashem, which was achieved and accessed through the Mesiras Nefesh of the days of Purim, the concept of the Goyrol, in which they reached the level of Atzmus, the power to join both Kodesh and Chol, both on Purim, Malach is permitted, and at the same time, there's a Simcha Adola Yada. And all this starts on this Shabbos. HaMaisa hu ha'ikar, the deed is the main thing. On this Shabbos, we should be marbim besimcha, mishenichnas adar marbim besimcha, which is connected with Torah, because Pikude Hashem Yesharim Samchei Lev, the mitzvahs of Hashem, gladden the heart, and therefore there should be additional efforts in all the three kavan of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim, especially supplying Tzorchei Purim, the needs of Purim, Mishta v'Simcha. And hopefully, Midah Keneged Midah, our engagement in this, in provision, will bring the blessings of Hashem, so much so that we will have difficulty in finding a poor person to give Matanas Levyonim to on the day of Purim. Umismech geula legeula. One redemption is juxtaposed with the next redemption, and an additional simcha, even in these days of darkness, when kolu kolakitzin, all the end times for Mashiach's coming have passed, and yet we increase in joy in a way which we demand from Hashem, that our joy should be justified joy, because He's going to bring the geula, and then we'll have the Mishpatim, we'll have the Sanhedrin back in its place next to the Mizbeach, we'll have the Shekalim, we'll have the Machzis HaShekel to bring for the Korbanos Sibur, we will be able to say Zeh Yitnu, we'll be able to point with our finger at the Geula Hamitis V'Hashlema V'Leikonefeid Meirecha, and all that should be Teikef or Miyad Mamash.